What up, fam? It's Mrs. Klein.
Howdy, it's Mrs. Wolbrin, and we are here with the Lesson 15 podcast, Manifest Destiny in the Growing Nation. And as you listen, I just want you to keep in mind the guiding question: how justifiable was U.S. expansion in the 1800s?
All right. And of course, you guys, there's the vocabulary terms. Some of them you might hear in this podcast, some of you might have heard in others, but they are annex, diplomacy, manifest destiny, Mexican-American War, territory, and the Texas War for Independence.
Okay, and also be ready for your podcast quiz when you come in tomorrow.
That's right.
Okay, we're going to start talking about Texas. And we're going to start with Americans coming to Texas. So the story of Texas begins with Moses Austin, a banker and business owner who dreamed of starting a United States colony in Spanish Texas. In 1821, Spanish officials granted Austin a huge piece of land. After Moses Austin died that same year, his son, Stephen, took over his father's dream.
All right. Stephen F. Austin arrived in Texas just as Mexico declared its independence from Spain, and he took control of Texas. Mexican officials agreed to let Austin start his colony under certain conditions, including that he select only moral and hardworking settlers. The settlers had to promise to become Mexican citizens and to join the Catholic Church. I also think they had to agree to speak Spanish as well.
Yeah.
Okay, that was another thing they said they were going to do.
Mm-hmm. Austin agreed to Mexico's terms. By 1827, he had attracted 297 families, soon known as the Old 300, to Texas.
Okay, but then there were some rising tensions. So by 1830, there were about 25,000 Americans in Texas compared to only 4,000 Tejanos, or Texans of Mexican descent. But tensions between the two groups soon arose.
Yes. Now, the Mexican government responded to these tensions by closing Texas to further U.S. immigration and by sending troops to Texas to enforce the immigration laws.
Okay, all right. And the Texans rebel. All right. So the Americans in Texas resented these actions. And in 1833, Austin traveled to Mexico and presented the Texans' demand to the new head of the Mexican government, General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. The general was a power-hungry dictator who once boasted, "If I were God, I would wish to be more." Gosh, dang, man, he thought highly of himself. Rather than bargain with Austin, Santa Anna had him arrested and jailed for promoting a rebellion.
Soon after Austin was released in 1835, Texans rose up in revolt. And you guys have all heard of the Alamo. So this is when the Alamo comes into play. In late February 1836, a large part of Santa Anna's army reached San Antonio, Texas. About 180 Texan volunteers, including 8 Tejanos, defended the town. The Texans had taken over an old mission known as the Alamo.
Okay, all right. For 12 days, the Mexicans pounded the Alamo with cannonballs until the first light of dawn on March 6th, when Santa Anna ordered his troops to storm the fort.
For 90 minutes, the battle raged, and then it was all over. By day's end, every one of the Alamo's defenders was dead, and those who had survived the battle were executed on the spot by Santa Anna's order.
Okay, all right.
And Santa Anna's decision to kill every man at the Alamo filled Texans with rage.
Okay.
Also, I think he left like one survivor to say exactly what happened at the Alamo.
Exactly. Like for those of you guys who've had me, I've told you stories about my grandma killing a rabbit and putting it in the chain link fence so that all the other rabbits would know what would happen if they got into her garden. And that's kind of like what went down. So like you can go and said, this is what's going to happen to you if you mess with if you mess with Mexico. All right. So Texas wins its independence is the next section because like clearly they're not happy about this. Sam Houston, the commander of the Texas Revolutionary Army, understood Texans' rage. However, as Santa Anna pushed on, Houston's only hope was to retreat eastward. By luring Santa Anna deeper into Texas, he hoped to make it more difficult for the general to supply his army and maintain its battle readiness.
Although Houston's strategy was unpopular, it worked brilliantly. In April, Santa Anna caught up with Houston near the San Jacinto River. Expecting the Texans to attack at dawn, the general kept his troops awake all night. When no attack came, the wary Mexicans relaxed, and Santa Anna went to his tent to take a nap.
Late that afternoon, however, Houston's troops staged a surprise attack. Yelling, "Remember the Alamo!" the Texans overran the Mexican camp, prompting Santa Anna to flee. However, he was captured the next day, and in exchange for his freedom, he ordered all his remaining troops out of Texas. The Texas War for Independence had been won, but Mexico did not fully accept the loss of its territory.
Yeah. Now, to annex Texas or not, now independent, the Republic of Texas earned the nickname the Lone Star Republic because of the single star on its flag.
Mm-hmm.
Most Texans were Americans who wanted Texas to become part of the United States.
But despite their wishes, Texas remained independent for 10 years, during which time people in the United States were divided over whether to annex Texas or not. When you annex an area, you guys, you add a territory to a country. Okay, all right. And then ultimately, once you get enough people who are living there, then they can apply for statehood. So there were people who were trying to figure out, like, what are we going to do? Should we annex Texas? Southerners were eager to add another slave state, whereas Northerners who opposed slavery wanted to keep Texas out of the United States.
Yeah. And then in 1844, there was a presidential campaign where James K. Polk ran, and he was a very strong believer in manifest destiny, and he was eager to acquire Texas. After Polk was elected, Congress voted to annex Texas. In 1845, Texas was admitted as the 28th state. Now, you might think that Texas and Oregon were sufficient new territory for any president, but not for Polk. This humorless, hardworking president had one great goal of expanding the United States as far as possible.
Oh my gosh, like humorous and hardworking. Those are like, I don't want to be the hardworking guy, but humorless, I don't know. Okay, all right. But single-minded, I guess. We've got like single focus. All right, Polk's gaze fell next on the huge areas known as California and New Mexico. He was determined to have them both, by purchase if possible, by force if necessary.
These areas were first colonized by Spain, but became Mexican territories when Mexico won its independence in 1821. Now, Polk sent a representative to Mexico to try to buy the territories, but Mexican officials refused even to see Polk's representative.
There we go. All right, so war breaks out in Texas. When Congress voted to annex Texas, relations between the United States and Mexico turned sour. Mexico considered the annexation of Texas an act of war, and to make matters worse, Texas and Mexico could not agree on a border. Texas claimed the Rio Grande as its border on the south and the west, whereas Mexico wanted the border to be the Nueces River, about 150 miles northeast of the Rio Grande.
Okay, now on April 25th, 1846, Mexican soldiers fired on U.S. troops who were patrolling along the Rio Grande. 16 Americans were killed or wounded. This was just the excuse for a war that Polk had been waiting for. Mexico, he charged, had invaded our territory and shed American blood upon American soil. 2 days after Polk's speech, Congress declared war on Mexico, starting the Mexican-American War.
Okay, all right. Now, the fall of New Mexico and California happened here. All right, a few months later, General Stephen Kearny led the Army of the West out of Kansas with orders to occupy New Mexico and then continue west to California. Mexican opposition melted away in front of Kearny's, and I think they may even pronounce his last name Kearny, but I think it is, but it looks like Kearny, with Kearny's army, and the Americans took control of New Mexico without firing a shot.
Yeah. Meanwhile, a group of Americans launched a rebellion against Mexican rule in California.
All right. When Kearny reached California, he joined forces with the rebels. Within weeks, all of California was under U.S. control.
Okay. So we're going to move on to the United States invades Mexico. The conquest of Mexico itself was far more difficult. U.S. forces invaded Mexico from two directions. General Taylor, Zachary Taylor, who goes on to become president later, marched south from Texas to the Mexican city of Monterrey, near a ranch called Buena Vista. Taylor met 15,000 Mexican soldiers led by Santa Anna. After 2 days, Santa Anna retreated. The war in northern Mexico ended.
All right, but in southern Mexico, a second force led by General Winfield Scott landed at Veracruz and moved toward Mexico City. Despite fierce resistance by Mexican soldiers, Mexico City fell to Scott in September of 1847.
Yeah, and again, just despite determined resistance, Scott's army captured Mexico City in September of 1847, and watching from a distance, this is kind of funny, a Mexican officer muttered darkly, God is a Yankee.
Nice. Whatever. God must be on our side. All right. All that manifest destiny, right?
Yeah.
Okay, we were destined to take over. All right. So now the war comes to a close and we sign a treaty that's called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. In early 1848, Mexico and the United States signed this treaty. Okay. Mexico agreed to give up Texas and a vast region known as the Mexican Cession. A cession is something that is given up. This area included present-day states of California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico, as well as parts of Colorado and Wyoming. So it's a big chunk of land.
Huge chunk. Under this agreement, Mexico gave up half of all of its territory, and in return, the United States agreed to pay Mexico $15 million. It also promised to protect the 80,000 to 100,000 Mexicans living in Texas and the Mexican Cession. Most of these promises, however, were not kept.
Okay, all right. Now, this leaves like one little stretch of land that we still want to get our hands on, and it's known as the Gadsden Purchase. A few years later, the United States acquired still more land from Mexico. In 1853, James Gadsden arranged the purchase of a strip of land just south of the Mexican Cession for $10 million. Railroad builders wanted this land because it was relatively flat and could serve as a good railroad route. The acquisition of this land, known as the Gadsden Purchase, created the present-day border of the southwestern United States with Mexico.
Okay. Now, we just want to review with you guys this whole lesson, lesson 15, manifest destiny, right? We've learned about how the United States acquired all these different territories. So, going back, the Louisiana Purchase. As you remember, in 1803, the United States added this vast territory known as Louisiana, which doubled the nation's land area. This territory also gave the United States control of the Mississippi River and the port of New Orleans, ensuring farmers west of the Appalachians that they could get their crops to market.
All right, and then also how we acquire Florida. After Andrew Jackson marched into Florida and removed the Spanish governor, President Monroe gave Spain the option to govern the territory properly or get out. In 1819, to avoid going to war, Spain signed a treaty that gave Florida to the United States.
Okay, and then Texas. In 1836, Americans in Texas rebelled against the Mexican government. After the Texans' devastation at the Alamo, the Texas Revolutionary Army defeated the Mexican Army, leading to the creation of the Lone Star Republic. In 1845, Congress admitted Texas into the Union. And in 1846, the Lone Star Republic was formally dissolved.
All right, that leads us to the Oregon Country. As routes westward were established, thousands of Americans settled in the Oregon Country, and soon there was a drive to annex all of Oregon. In 1846, to avoid going to war, the United States signed a treaty with Great Britain and added half of the Oregon Country.
And lastly, war with Mexico. In 1846, the United States went to war with Mexico in the Mexican-American War. In an 1848 treaty with Mexico, the United States acquired present-day states of California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico, as well as parts of Colorado and Wyoming. In 1853, the Gadsden Purchase added land that completed the outline of the continental United States.
Okay, all right. And then be thinking, you guys, that guiding question again, like how justifiable were each one of those ways in which the United States was able to acquire this new territory and land?
Yeah, because now we are from sea to
Sea
shining
to shining sea, exactly.
All right, guys, take it easy.
All right, later.